Nancy, is that your clock?
That's my clock, yes.
It's striking the hour. I love that. So, welcome to sadly the last of our home chats for Homestart at Home with Homestarts. Welcome to all our viewers and the people who've tuned in on YouTube. It's really lovely to have you here on a Friday night, actually, Nancy. And I'm thrilled that you are, we're rounding up with you. Now, will you introduce yourself? Because I wouldn't in a million years know how to describe you.
Well, first of all, can I just say how excited I am? I actually feel as though I've gone out because, I've been battened down in this house for 10 weeks. And so I've got sort of a bit done up because I thought I'm going out. I feel like I'm going out. And so this is fantastic. How would I describe myself? I've worked for a living. I'm still working for a living. More people got to know me when I won Bake Off. And I like doing lots of things. I'm fairly good at doing lots of things, but not an expert at anything.
I think you do yourself down, Nancy. I think that you, for a start, you can't win Bake Off without being flaming good at baking. So I would say if I were going to do it in a more, but you've been very modest, I would say that you are an extremely talented homemaker and you are very, very good at navigating your way round a house with economy, with incredible good sense about the environment, with great humour and always great advice. And you have a way of, for anyone who follows you on social media and sees all the things you're doing, you just have a way of putting across something which is incredibly simple. And then you think, oh, why didn't I think of that? That is it. That is it. Brilliant. We've already got people coming in, joining us for the chat. We've got Will Meany, who I can tell you is from Cleveland, Ohio, although he hasn't said that today, but he is. And we've got Granny Caroline, who says, it's blowing a gale in Tenby today. Glad to be inside listening to Kirstie and Friends. That is very nice to hear that. Yeah. And Carol Gardner says, good evening. So, Nancy, tell me how you've been coping with lockdown, because you are a very outgoing, chatty, gregarious person.
Well, how have I coped with lockdown? I think social media has been really my platform for a while, and coming up it'll be 4 years next February, so nearer 3 years. I've been sharing something every day. Sometimes just a recipe, a link to a recipe, or sometimes it might be a cleaning tip or a little gardening tip. But then when lockdown came about, I started to get an awful lot of feedback from followers that said, this is actually keeping me going. And, and the more, I don't need to tell you, Kirstie, that the more camera work you do, the easier it gets, because at first it's just this awful thing. It's one-way communication and it's very difficult. But then after a while, you just get used to talking to yourself, basically. And then with that sort of not bothered about the camera business, I started being a bit more carefree, a bit more dancing around to music. Whatever came on the radio, I would give it a bit of a move and a bit of a dance. And people were saying, please do more of this. I'm learning so much, but being entertained at the same time. So basically, that's how I've dealt with COVID. I've sort of embraced social media in a massive way to try and keep my followers entertained.
Now, I made your lemon curd.
I know.
I did something slightly wrong, and you immediately knew what I'd done, how it had happened, and you just explained it very, very, very simply. It's a great talent to be good at something and want to make other people good at it. A lot of people somehow want to keep some mystique so that we think they're just very clever, but we could never be as clever as them. And what you do so beautifully is you share. you genuinely want people to be as good as you are at doing that thing. And
yeah, I think there is this belief that information is power, and if I've got lots of information, that's going to make me a much better baker or cook or cleaner or whatever than the next person. And it's not about being. If I'd had the internet as a young mum, I wouldn't have made the tons of mistakes that I made, either in the kitchen or around the house. If I'd had a video I could watch, a 60-second video, that because a visual explains so much more than pages and pages of text. And if somebody just shows you, you think, oh, right, get it, I know what to do now. And I try and respond to all the questions. So and I do get a lot of questions now, but I try to respond to them all, because I think, if I'm helping somebody get it right, and now people are posting their photographs of, this is the cake. Can you believe I've made this? And then somebody said, I want to be able to make croissant. They're up there, aren't they? Level. I want to be able to make croissant. So I thought, do you know what? We'll do it, but we'll do it over 2 days. And so I did these massive Instagram stories. I mean, your phone would be flat by the time you got to the end of it. But then people were posting me, these are my croissants, these are my Danish pastries, and I've done it. And that gives me, it makes me want to continue.
So essentially what you're saying is you are, during COVID particularly, living off the enthusiasm and happiness that you are able to give people, because you're teaching them something, they're going out and doing it, and then they're feeling. So that's exactly what was happening with me when I was doing the craft show, but that was just 2 weeks, and now obviously we finished filming that, but I had an enormous wave of positivity coming back off people who'd done these crafts, made the things at home, done them far better than I could. I mean, I suspect you with your croissants, you were doing brilliant croissants and people were sending back less brilliant croissants. With me, I was doing crafts and people were sending back brilliant crafts. Oh, do you know what? We've got some more questions, and I don't want them to disappear up the page. Suzanne says hello, Suzanne, and Kate asks, what are both of your favourite cake recipes?
I thought I might be asked what was my favourite cake recipe, and I think it really depends on my mood, if I'm honest, because sometimes, and you'll know what I mean about this, sometimes it's just got to be chocolate. You think, I just need chocolate. And then sometimes it's got to be something not overly sweet. And other times it's a slice of Victoria sandwich cake with fresh cream and strawberry jam. And I love a coffee and walnut cake as well. So I don't have a dead favourite, but I have lots of favourites, and they're usually classics, if I'm honest. I don't go for weird and wonderful flavours.
I love a coffee and walnut cake, I really do. But weirdly, my go-to thing that I would have on my kind of last meal is not actually a cake as such. It's Nigella Lawson's key lime pie, and there's just something about that citrusy creaminess of that key lime pie which I just go bundle. Anything. I don't like cheap, that cheesecake that if you sometimes shop bought cheesecake is really slightly floury and a bit kind of like wallpaper paste. I like it really sharp and citrusy, and but that combination of the creaminess and the citrus I really like. So again, something like a lemon drizzle or something like that. So Mary says, so excited to watch Nancy tonight. Josie, what a special lady Nancy is. I love her recipes. I couldn't concur more. And Jack says, best cakes to make for beginners, please?
Best cakes to make for beginners. I would say there are a few traditional methods. There's one, a rubbed in cake. So if you're ever worried about your mixture curdling or not getting a decent enough rise, you can actually rub the mixture in as though you're making pastry. And that's an easy one to do. My lemon drizzle is as easy as it gets, and probably my most popular recipe, I'd say. And I costed it 70p.
I love costing. I love the costing. That's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of Jack Munro's work, because she does that costing, and it's just brilliant.
Yes.
Now, this is a bit of an in joke, Nancy, for those people who've been tuning in all week. But Will, who is from Cleveland, Ohio, as previously discussed, asked where the Friths were. And the Friths are a couple, Mrs. and Mrs. Frith, who I had been calling Mr. and Mrs. Frith all week until. And so what happened is Will says, where are the Friths? And then we have Dreamers22 who say, we're here, ha ha, change of name, love the chats, hi Will. I adore the fact that there are people who've been tuning in over the week. And it's really sad that this is our last one, but we never know, we might be able to do something like this again. Nancy, I don't think I've said thank you yet, and I am really grateful to you. I made a list of people who I wanted to do these chats with, and all of the people that were my top 5 said yes, and I was really thrilled to bits about that. There's something about the work that Home Start do which I knew would appeal to you. Had you come across Home Start before?
There is a local Home Start to me in Hull, and when you'd asked me to be involved, I had heard about them, but I didn't know that much about the work that they do. And I've heard some really sad stories, particularly not particularly to do with Home Start, but just situations in general for people during the COVID pandemic. People, single mothers that, there was one story about a girl that was self-employed, and because of COVID, her job stopped, no money, in private rented, with a child, and what is she supposed to do? And so, thank goodness there's Home Start and organisations like Home Start, but it is dire for so many people.
It really is, and let's be honest, Nancy, it's not going to get better.
No,
we are facing very tough economic times as a result of the COVID pandemic, and for vulnerable young families who were struggling before, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be worrying getting back out there when kids start school. Oh, there's the telephone, and there's no one to answer it because I managed to boot everyone out finally after 3 days. So we're just going to have to let it ring and ignore it. So the COVID emergency fund, the Home Start COVID emergency fund, is so important because it's helping young families who are really struggling with all the implications. We know what isolation is like. We know how difficult it is dealing with postnatal depression, with twins, with a child with particular needs or health needs, perhaps when a partner is in the forces or it's somewhere that they're not there to help, or single parent families. It doesn't take a huge leap in imagination to see how all of us could go from, how old are your kids now, Nancy?
Oh, well, they're in the 40s now.
God.
Yeah.
Yes. See, you are so young that when you say things like that, I'm like, no, not possible.
Yeah.
But do you remember what it was like when you were a young mum?
And I did have a number of years.
You were a teenage mum.
No, and I did have a number of years as a single parent.
Mm-hmm.
Know exactly what it's like to come in from work. You're tired. It's dark. It's cold. The kids are hungry. There's just enough money to spin out, and it can be pretty miserable. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because let's face it, the social media audience is usually quite young. I mean, the bulk of my followers are between 25 and 34. And I'm thinking, if I can give those people something on a daily basis to help, I give my recipes out, I show them how to do things. Nobody has to buy anything, nobody has to subscribe to anything. And there might be something there for everybody at some time. Because I think, it's tough, and it's going to, like you've just said, it's going to get even more tough.
Yeah, it's really important. Home Starts Work is so important.
Yeah.
We've got our Just Giving page, and if there's anything that you are able to donate, that makes a huge difference. Now we have So, is it Karis? Yes, Karis says loving this program. Thank you, Karis. Dreamers22 says it seems everyone has been going mad for banana loaves. My dad has mastered a vegan version. That is very clever. Rashmi, hi Rashmi, says a question that I've always wanted to know the answer to. Can you add baking powder when baking with self-raising flour?
Right, this is an interesting one, because there are quite a lot of recipes, especially with the method where you throw everything into the bowl together to make, especially for standalone mixers, tabletop mixers. Because everything's been swirled around in a bowl together, you're often asked to put self-raising flour and then add extra baking powder. For me, I can taste it. And so very, very rarely will you find a recipe of mine with self-raising flour and additional baking powder. It's all about the mixing. And I don't do an all-in-one sponge. I cream together the butter and the sugar, or the margarine and the sugar. I add the egg one at a time, and then finally fold in self-raising flour. I never use extra baking powder because I can taste it.
That's really interesting. But do you do plain flour then with? I mean, just because at the moment people have got what they've got.
Absolutely, you can make your own blend. But what I wouldn't suggest doing is trying to mix a blend for that particular recipe, because trying to get the right amount is difficult. So what I do, I make a blend using 500 grams of plain flour and 15 grams, which is usually one of those little sachets of baking powder. But sift them together twice, not once, because you want it to be well distributed. And then put that in a jar and call it your own blend self-raising flour. And that works exactly the same.
You see, I love having you here. I'm going to kidnap you, Nancy, just keep you live on YouTube all night. So we've got some questions. So Yvonne, good evening all. Good evening, Yvonne. And Carol, how do you stop the cherries sinking to the bottom of a cherry cake? Do you know what that I know that's a practical question, but it sounds like a metaphorical question at the moment, because I think we all feel that the cherries are sinking to the bottom of our cherry cake. So Nancy, over to you.
Couple of tips, right? First tip, if you're using glacé cherries, wash them, because that sticky stuff around them makes them heavier and makes them sink. So wash them, dry them, then cut them up, and then take just about half a tablespoon of the flour that you're going to use in your cake and swirl your cherries around in that flour so that your cherries are completely covered, right? And then mix them into the batter. Now then, keep a few back and cut your cherries into halves or quarters so they're not too big and not too heavy that they're going to drop down in the batter. The batter needs to be fairly thick so that it's going to hold those cherries. So if your recipes whatever your recipe is, and you're thinking, actually, this is a bit thin, I think it needs to be a bit thicker than this, otherwise these cherries are going to drop. Add another tablespoon of flour, but then pop it into the tin, pop it in the oven, and then after just 5-10 minutes, sprinkle a few more cherries on top of the batter. and they will just drop just a little bit. But then when your cake is done, you'll have an even distribution of cherries. It's very rare that you'll get a cherry sitting on the top that hasn't sunk down. But if you let your cake just bake maybe 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, then sprinkle a few on the top, and they will sink in a little bit, but then get covered up by the batter. And then when you cut your cake, it'll have cherries all the way down.
I feel like I've been told how to work the tables in Vegas.
Love it.
I was literally, my jaw was just slowly dropping with that. Just one thing, Nancy, when you say wash the cherries, do you mean, is it boiling water? How does that stuff come off?
Yeah, no, put them in a sieve,
mm-hmm.
and just literally rinse them under the tap. And that sticky goo on the outside will just wash off, and then dry them on kitchen paper, and then put them up and then dust them in flour.
Carol, thank you for asking that question, because it absolutely made my night. And Dreamers22 say, great question, Carol. Fantastic. Randy, Nancy, what was your favourite memory of Bake Off?
I'll tell you one of my favourite memories of Bake Off, because after about halfway, the whole thing became much more relaxed, because you're getting to know the crew, and you're getting to know Paul and Mary and Mel and Sue. You know, it was like going to a weekend job, if you like, in the end, and things were much more relaxed. And you might think, because it's a few years ago now, but the final technical challenge for us was, we had 2 hours, and we had to make 12 mini Victoria sandwich cakes, 12 tarte au citron, and 12 scones. And we had no instructions. And I can remember we just had a piece of paper in front of us, and it just said, make 12, make 12, make 12. And I looked and I thought, well, there must be a page missing from this. And you know, when they say, Paul and Mary, will you leave the tent when it's the technical challenge? Well, they didn't leave the tent. They stood there. And Paul Hollywood looked at me and he did this. And that for me was just so funny, because it just seemed unbelievable what we've been asked to do. It just seemed unbelievable. But yeah, so that was looking back, that was great fun.
Now, Nancy, Isabel, and I know the answer to this question, and I love hearing this story. So I'd love it if you would tell it. Isabel says, how many times did you apply for Bake Off?
Right, I applied for Bake Off. I was season 5, 2014, but I applied for season 4, 2013. And I filled in the form, and then I got a phone call around Christmas time saying, we've got your application form. We like it. We'd like to do a little bit of a telephone test, if you like. We'll ask you a few questions. And they asked me a few questions. And I thought, well, they were all right. And then they said, oh, that was really good. We'll get back to you. So you don't know whether you've done any good or not. Then I got another phone call saying, we'd like you to come for an audition. So I was invited to this audition to Birmingham, and came back from that. Then I got another phone call, we'd like you for a second audition. And I thought, yes, I'm going to be on here. I just know I'm going to be on here. And I went for this second audition, which is very much like a technical challenge. So we were in this sort of, I think it was like a sort of school or college canteen, dining, you know, like a, what do you call it? Where they do their own cooking and things. And we were doing this, we had to make a cake, I think we had to do. And I thought, this is absolutely fine. And I came back, but I told everybody that I'd been for this audition for the Bake Off. And I even told our butcher. And I can remember going into the butcher's shop, and there were other people waiting to be served. And they said, you're joking. You're joking. So I said, oh, yeah, I've had 2 auditions. I think I'm down to like, the last 50. That's amazing. How fantastic would that be? And then I got a phone call to say, I'm sorry you're not on the show. And I was absolutely devastated. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go and untell everybody. All these people I've been telling that I've applied to go on the Bake Off and I've had 2 auditions, I'm now going to have to untell them. And it's a bit like, when you apply for a job that you really want and then you don't get it. And so what you do is you sort of pretend you didn't want it in the first place. And so people were stopping me and saying, how did you get on? How did you get on? Did you get onto the Bake Off? And I said, no, I can't say I'm bothered, if I'm honest. I don't really want to. I don't think it was for me. And I was so disappointed. It's unbelievable how disappointed I was. And so then I thought, well, I'm going to ask for some feedback, because if it's because I'm too old, then there's nothing I can do about it. But if it's something that I can improve on, or if you're allowed to apply again. So I rang up and I said, can I ask for some feedback? Is it that I'm a bit too old for the show? And they said, oh, no, age has got nothing to do with it. So I said, well, is it because, am I allowed to apply again? So they said, yeah, you can apply as many times as you like. So I said, so what was it why didn't you want me on the show? And they said, because your bread was rubbish. So my bread was rubbish, because you don't know what you don't know. And I had to go to this audition, and actually Paul and Mary were at the audition. And that's the only time they've ever done it. They wanted to see and understand more about the audition process. But I assumed that they were at every audition. But I found out later that that's the only one they ever went to. And I can remember taking this loaf and I put it in front of Paul Hollywood. And he said to me, so why have you underproved your bread? But I didn't know I'd underproved my bread. And so that's another reason why I want to try and show people, because I didn't know what an underproved loaf looked like. I didn't really know what an overproved loaf looked like, and how to know when it's just right. And because actually I think bread is probably the hardest thing to get right. But yeah, so that was my story. So I applied for Series 5, 2014, and told nobody, because I thought if I don't get on again, I don't have to tell anybody anything. And there you go.
There you go, Nancy. It's absolutely my favourite story, and it is just brilliant. And I remember the first time I heard it, just loving it and loving the bit about the butcher and the whole thing. And I can imagine, and you do say those things, and then you have to backtrack out of it.
Yeah.
Two really strange things that I should probably share with everyone. The first thing is that because of technology, Nancy and I mustn't make any noise when the other one is speaking, because it cuts out the other one's mic. So it is totally unnatural to listen to something as vibrant as that story and not make any noise. So weird discipline. And then the second thing is, I'm so used to doing telly. And for me now, in my brain, this feels like telly. And so when you were doing this, as you know, when you do telly, you have a mic just here. And if you touch it, it makes a booming noise and you have to repeat what you've said. So when you were doing that story, you were doing this, and I was thinking, oh, she's going to have to repeat that. She's going to have, and you realize how hardwired your brain is for your work. And there's just two weird things to add into the mix of the strangeness of doing this kind of chat, which now I'm really getting used to and enjoying. Now, we've got some other, oh, look, okay, so now we've got an interesting question here, which I don't want to lose. I just want to thank Isabel for that question, by the way, because I knew it would get that answer, and it's such a great story. Simon, what's the best washing up liquid?
What's the best washing up liquid? Well, as part of my green journey, which I've now into year 3, I've stopped using proprietary ordinary washing up liquids, because if you look on the back of all of them, because this is part of my thing, it will say harmful to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. So I now use an eco-friendly washing up liquid, and I'm pleased with it. I can say who it is, can't I, on here?
Yeah, it's telly. It's not telly.
It's is it e-cover or
cover? Yeah. That's the other weird thing about doing YouTube. You can say what something is. Like yesterday, I was like, Pinterest rocks, and I was like, I'd never be able to say that on the telly, but I will be going back to work. Everyone, don't worry, I'm not gonna. Okay, so this is I think, an American expression, which I'm going to try and translate. Will Meany, our nice Will from Cleveland, Ohio, says, I can't bake from scratch. And then there's a little tear emoji. I think what he means is, what expression would we use? I can't bake for toffee. I think that's what he means. And does he mean that I know in the US you have a lot of those packets where you have the ingredients and everything. He might mean that, but at the risk of putting words in Will's mouth, what would you say to someone who has the mistaken belief that they can't bake?
I would say, yes, you can. And I would also say you can if you think you can. If you think you can do it, you can do it. If you look at something and think, do you know what, I could never do that, then, but I would say, have a go. I would absolutely. And I think if you're saying I can't cook from scratch or I can't bake from scratch, I think what is probably meaning is, because they now say scratch cooking and scratch baking, and a scratch bakery and and it means that nothing comes half done or half baked, or everything is done like butter, sugar, eggs. And the scratch bakery for bread is everything's done from the raw ingredients at that bakery. They're not buying in ready-made starters, or it really means you're doing it from scratch, from the beginning. You're not buying anything part made. So that's probably what it means. It doesn't. What I would say to anybody that's tuned in tonight is, if there's anything you want me to do, send me a message on Instagram, and we'll do it. I'll show you how to do it, because that's what I've been doing. And what I'm finding is people want the ordinary things. They don't want the chocolate and hazelnut delice that you cut into tiny squares and serve as I want to know how to make a lemon meringue pie. I want to know how to make, and people want those things. Yeah.
I've been making a lot of meringues recently because I've been making a lot of my own mayonnaise, and I can't bear the waste of the egg whites. What I love about meringues is how long they last. It's such a thrill because you make this thing and it lasts seemingly forever in an airtight thing, and then all you just need is a bit of ice cream or cream and a bit of fruit, and it's so easy. And once you overcome that fear of meringues, you're away. And so it's literally mayonnaise on the one side and meringues on the other. Now I'm so sorry, I think that was a burp. Dorothy says, hi Nancy, listening to this from the motorway in Norway on my way to see my kitchen garden that Nancy has given me advice about. She's a fountain of knowledge. She is indeed, Dorothy. Well observed. And Rashmi, this is interesting, apropos of our baking powder question. Hello, Kirstie and Nancy. Thank you for the input. I have to admit that I can taste the baking powder when I have added it. Carol says, great, thank you. I'm going to make my dad a cherry cake for Father's Day. Brilliant, Carol. Well, you've got the answer. The Dreamers are saying, brilliant. We were always afraid to open the oven when baking. So apropos of your cherry advice, the oven thing, is that a myth?
I've never found it to be a problem. What would be a problem would be if you banged your oven door closed. But nowadays, especially if you've got a fan oven, you can gently open it and do whatever you want to do and then gently close the door. I think back in the day when people had gas ovens with a big door that opened like a front door, if you opened that, you would definitely let all the heat out of it. But I mean, the ovens now are so efficient, and you're not going to do any, well, I haven't done any harm by opening the door. I would never slam it shut because I think the bang could cause it to drop a little bit, but you just do it gently. I would like to say something about, because so many people say, how do you know when a cake is baked? And there's a tip that I use, and I don't know how best to describe it other than, because you can try with a skewer, you can try a wooden toothpick and all of those things, and they say if it comes out and it's clean, then your cake's baked, and then you take it out and the middle drops. And thermometers, all right, that's maybe a bit specialised for some people because different types of cake need to be at a different temperature, for example. But what works, I've found, is that, and you don't burn yourself, just don't burn yourself. But if you think the time for your cake is about ready, then open your oven door and just don't turn away, don't look at the cake, but just feel the side with the finger ends. Just feel the side near the edge of the tin, because it's going to be baked there. It's definitely going to be baked there. And feel what that feels like, how much resistance you get. And then move your fingers to the middle of the cake. And it feels exactly the same in the middle. You're going to be fine. If when you move your fingers into the middle of the cake, you think, hang on a minute, this feels a bit softer. It's not springing back the same as it did at the sides, then it needs another 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes. But if you start at the sides, because lots of books will say, press the middle and see if it springs back. But if you don't really know what it is you're feeling for, but if you start at the sides, because it is baked there, because it bakes there first, and then move your fingers across to the middle without really looking at it, do it more from feel rather than looking. And just think, actually, no, that doesn't feel as, it doesn't feel as firm. Or you'll think, yeah, that feels exactly the same as the sides. That's done. Does that make sense?
Crystal clear, makes huge amount of sense. I mean, my face was just, I was hanging on every word, Nancy. And I think that may help with the question we have. By the way, I just got to say, I'm completely ashamed. When we first started this, as Nancy will concur, we had a bit of a technical chat and everybody switched off all their alerts and we tried to work out whose computer was pinging, and I was pretty confident it wasn't mine. Turns out it was mine, and all the pings are my pings. Sorry, everyone. Anyway, so Peter Grigg says, evening all. Evening, Peter. My wife wanted to know how to stop cakes rising in a way that creates a point in the top.
We have it. All you need is a piece of aluminium foil, a collar. So foil comes in a fairly, about 12 inches wide. So fold that into 4. So you've got a band like that. And you can use the foil over and over and over again. I have strips of it in the drawer that I've had going for ages until it sort of disintegrates. And wrap that round the edge of your tin. And what that does is diffuse the heat. So that as the cake's baking, rather than the sides baking really quickly, and then they go dark brown at the sides before your middles had chance to bake, and also because then the heat is moving in, it's pushing the middle up. But if it bakes evenly and the foil diffuses the heat, then you'll get a nice flat cake. The sides will be the same colour as the bottom and the top. They won't be dark brown, and you'll have a perfect sponge.
Again, crystal clear. Everyone can understand that. Fantastic. I love this. Yvonne Thorogood says, I looked at the application form. It was huge. And I have to say, I've not seen the application form for Bake Off because it won't surprise anyone to discover I am not going on Bake Off and would probably be barred anyway. But the application form for location is absolutely enormous. And I'm amazed that people get through it. But it is what you have to do is just sit down and think, right, this is a sort of my project for this evening. I'm just going to plow through this form. I once was asked to apply for a sort of civil service role on a board, and I found the application form so intimidating I had to ask someone to come over and help with it. So I couldn't be more sympathetic, Yvonne, but I think Nancy would agree. Just plow through it, whatever you're applying, whichever show you're applying for, and you will get eventually to the end of the form. And Dorothy Arholt says, oh dear, Nancy, what a disappointment. I'm not bothered. Tears emoji. Oh, so yes, I can imagine that disappointment. Oh, so Will, do you remember Will we were talking about from scratch? I failed at everything I attempt. Honestly, Will, once you get into the Nancy Birtwhistle way, you will fail no more.
Will, what you need to do is decide what it is you'd like to make. Decide what it is you'd like to be able to do, to be proud of. Mm-hmm. Don't know whether it's bread or cakes or biscuits or whatever. Follow me on Instagram, get on there, send me a message, say it's Will, and this is what I'd like to make, and I'll take you through it step by step. How's that?
Nancy, thank you. It's very interesting because you obviously have this extraordinary community, and I'm very interested to discover that your community is so young, and that is a similar situation with Homestart, is that Homestart has this enormous community, and a lot of people watching us this evening will be volunteers. They will be people who've been helped by Homestart, as well as people who are currently being helped by Homestart, and it is that sense of community, and particularly at the moment, we all need that. And I would say to everyone out there who is watching, do everything in your power to learn a little more about Homestart. If you possibly can, if you're able to donate to the COVID Emergency Fund, please do. It is, I always say the same thing. Ever since I learned about the work of Homestart, I've been amazed by how far they managed to make a pound go in helping young families and children, and it is absolutely a remarkable organisation. But it is, Nancy, this community you clearly have is very much reflective of what Homestart do. And we've got questions absolutely coming in. So Rashmi says, it's been full of information. You've answered so many questions. Brilliant. Dreamers22, that foil tip has blown our mind. Well, I'm sure you saw my face. It blew my mind. Ooh, I know this is an interesting one. What do you think the best recipe is for children to help with?
The thing is, when you're baking with children, because we between us have got 10 grandchildren. So when they all come, which, you know, Christmas and those sorts of events, there can be 20 people around the table, and children love to have a job. They love to be given a job. And if you're baking with one child, then that's absolutely fine, but if you're baking with two, you have to make sure they've both got a job. Otherwise they start squabbling, or they want their own area of responsibility. And I think biscuits are great, because what you can do with a biscuit dough is split it and give them both their own little bowl of dough. And I always make biscuits and scones by hand, because I think a machine overworks them anyway. So that's great for kids. And it's fine that the dough gets a bit warm. Unlike pastry, where you want it to keep cool. Biscuit dough doesn't matter so much if it gets warm. So biscuits are fantastic to do with children. And then, of course, you can use all sorts of cutters. You can decorate with icing or dip them in chocolate, or, you know, there's lots of possibilities. And it's not that messy. It's not that messy. It's messy. Baking is a bit messy with children, but it's not as messy as, say, cake making with eggs and things.
We had Jane Emerson on yesterday, and she was talking about how brilliant baking is for maths. And it is absolutely sensationally good for maths, particularly when you discover you are slightly short of one ingredient or another, and you're having to calculate, cut everything down accordingly. And I think that anyone who's lacking in confidence at the moment about the homeschooling and has those desperate days when you just think, oh, I can't cope today, if you get them baking, then you are teaching them something. And it involves reading. If you read the recipe, it's very interesting how you see teaching the children how to go. So you have to read the whole recipe through first of all, and then do your stages, because if you start your stages first, you'll suddenly come to a bump in the road if you haven't and I do think baking is a fantastic way to introduce the whole gamut of homeschooling to the children. Now we've got questions flocking in. Wow, that's a fantastic name. Janet Culbert Ferguson. Tell Will to buy Nancy's book. It's wonderful with easy to follow videos. Thank you, Janet. That is brilliant. Peter, my 7-year-old son, loves baking so much. He wants to be either a chef or an astronaut, or ideally mix the two together somehow. What advice would you give a keen 7-year-old baker?
If you've got a keen 7-year-old baker, I have a keen 7-year-old granddaughter, and her piping skills are unbelievable compared to where the others were at that stage. She's precise, and she's very artish, very good with it, very creative, and I think she's probably going to be quite good. And if you can see that there is that interest, then you've a responsibility to develop it, really. And if you've got a really enthusiastic 7-year-old, I'd push them a little bit onto harder things, things that you probably wouldn't do until later on. I think if this child is really showing this amount of attention to detail, we need to be moving on. We need to be doing something a bit more challenging. Very
interesting. The Dreamers, and they say, Dreamers 22, what's the best form of replacement? Now this is very interesting. What's the best form of replacement flour for those of us struggling to find some in shops? Have heard of maybe blitzing oats?
Yes. During this COVID lockdown, particularly followers in the US were in a worse state than we are. They couldn't get yeast, they couldn't get flour, this week I was blitzing uncooked rice to make a fake frangipan, and it's beautiful. I would challenge anybody to know the difference between blitzed up uncooked rice to a powder and ground almonds. It's absolutely fine. And the same with, I did a loaf without any yeast, and I used self-raising flour, and it wasn't a soda bread. All I did was save 200 grams of dough from my previous loaf and kept it in the fridge in a bowl, and then that was my yeast starter for the next loaf. And because I had no plain flour, no bread flour, I used self-raising flour, and it was fine. We went through all that, and there were so many people that just couldn't get. It's not that they didn't have the money, even, they just couldn't get it. They couldn't get the flour. And so I thought, so it's been a great exercise for me in, pushing the boundaries and thinking, right, let's see what we can do with the things that we've got.
Am I wrong in thinking that the rice would be much cheaper than the ground almonds, pound for pound?
Well, ground almonds are £1.40 100 grams, and rice is 20p.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a saving and a half. That is.
Yeah, and if you've got children, if you're feeding a family or feeding children, or even if you went half and half, but I can remember very much thinking ground almonds are too expensive. I can't afford those. Very much so, and even now I think, I afford them, but even now I think, God, ground almonds are so expensive. A little bag is nearly £3.
Yeah. No. So Okie doke. So, no, this is not good news. This is not good news at all. It is 8:50. Holy Moses. How did that happen? How did that happen? So we've got to say that we're getting close to wrapping up. We've got any more questions? Put them in. Oh, we've got Dreamers 22. Your face sums up our reaction. Yes, absolutely. I'm loving this. Right, Pam. What is the best and cheapest meal for a family of 4?
Well, if you've got children at home, get them making pasta. 100 grams of flour and 1 egg per person, and tin of tomatoes, grated cheese, bit of ham, a few peppers, whatever you've got. And you've got a quick pizza. Oh no, I'm getting confused. Pasta and pizza. Yeah. No, pasta, an egg and 100 grams of flour, a pizza dough, again, just bread, flour and a bit of yeast and water. And I did a quick pizza, or you can do a quick pasta.
We've done a lot of homemade pizza during lockdown. The children are obsessed with it. Yes, it makes a mess, but they love it. They love the whole process. They love judging how hot the oven needs to be. They love putting them in, getting them out, seeing whether it's working, whether it's not working. The whole thing has been really brilliant for the kids, and they just chuck the sweet corn on or whatever it is. They don't really mind what's on the pizza. They love the whole thing.
Yeah.
Carol Gardner says, this is lovely. That's brilliant, as my son has a nut allergy. So not just a cheaper alternative. It's so funny. People are sending lots of Peter Grigg, who was our gentleman who asked about the cake, if I remember rightly. He says, thank you, Nancy. Your tips, Nancy, are an absolute joy. Your practicality is fascinating. You are our favourite. You're one of my favourite people. You're our Friday person. I wish we had another hour. I know that more questions will come in and more people. And all I would say is that if you have enjoyed this as much as I have, please find out more about Home Start, because Nancy has so kindly given her time on a Friday evening, because, like me, she recognises the work that Home Start do for young families is really, really, really important. And so the big thank you to Nancy is to focus on Home Start. Lots of messages are coming in saying thanks for the great tips. You'll see at the bottom is the Just Giving page for Home Start. Please, have a look up. You can just Google Just Giving Home Start. It'll all come up. But it is available at the bottom. And Yvonne says, I'd love to have a baking session with Nancy. Well, Yvonne, I can tell you, I'd done it on the Christmas show. It was an absolute joy. We were falling about. The whole thing was absolutely brilliant. When the Christmas show does come out, I'm certainly not here to promote my own work, but you'll see that it was just a joy. The whole thing was completely joyous. And I just want to say to everyone who, if you've just tuned in today, go to the Home Start website, because you'll see all the chats through the week are there. We had Tom from Snow Windows, we had Marina Fogel, we had Jane Emerson, we had the adorable Zena Shah, and then we have finished off the week with Nancy, to whom I am immensely grateful. Nancy, on the other side of lockdown, I hope very much that, I know we will, as our beloved Queen said, we will meet again. I'm so pleased to hear that you have just, in typical Nancy Birtwhistle style, you've just made the most of lockdown, and you've just kind of doubled down. And I think that is the way to do it. It's all, this is hard for everybody, but if you can find something to do and find a cause and find it's I can see that what you're doing is spending lockdown helping other people.
Yes. I think, well, the feedback, if I didn't get the feedback, I wouldn't keep doing it. But the feedback from my followers is that it's, one girl, this always sticks in my mind. One girl, she messaged me and said, I've just been 3 hours on the phone trying to get through to claim some unemployment benefit. And after 3 hours sitting on the phone cut me off. And she said, I was in floods of tears, and I picked my phone up and I just went to your feed, and I can't remember what I was making, but she said, it actually made me laugh. Whatever you were doing made me laugh. And it just put that phone call, that horrible experience, just into perspective, that there's actually nothing I can do about that, but I can enjoy this. And I thought, well, that makes it worthwhile, because it is a lot of work. And it's the editing down of the footage and deciding what it is reasonable to use that takes the time. It's not really the baking or it's messing around with the videos afterwards to try and edit them into some sort of reasonable, not too long footage. And it's that takes the time. And I do something every day if I can.
Do you know what? I don't think I have to say, I can't imagine there's such a thing as too long, Nancy. That is not a concept that I can grasp. I have to tell you this. I want to say to everyone out there, if you've enjoyed this and you want us to do it again another week of this, please tell us. Nancy Birtwhistle, star, tip-tastic person. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I hope that very, very, very soon you can see all 10 of those grandchildren, and that that we can all get back to some normality. But in the absence of that, bless you, and everyone who's watched. And I just have to say good night, and stick with Homestart, because if you choose to support Homestart, they are a fantastic organisation. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.